It is a great night tonight. We are so excited to be on the line with our Black brothers from the 100 Black Men of America. It is such an important time to gather brothers and sisters on an issue and a topic that is very near and dear to many of our hearts. We are first wanting to give a few acknowledgments tonight. We want to thank our friends at Walmart who are supporting us as we are advancing this work on cancer prevention. Also want to give a special shout out to the Divine Nine and our affiliates and chapters who shared this. We're almost at 100 participants already, and getting folks still logging in to see this very important conversation. Share it on Facebook. We're now live on Facebook. Share it with all of your family and friends, and know that this recording will be made available for all of you. Before we get started, I want to go ahead and turn this over to Brother Griggs, who's going to give us a special greeting from the 100. Brother Griggs, we're going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, President Arline Bradley. Thank you for the partnership and the opportunity to participate in this important forum this evening. On behalf of the Chairman of the Board, Milton Jones of the 100 Black Men of America, our Board of Directors and members, I really want to take this opportunity to extend our appreciation for allowing us to be here this evening. Prostate cancer is a major issue in our country in terms of health and wellness disparities. And it is incumbent upon all of us to do the work needed in order to help save our brothers. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, and we're looking forward to a very important discussion.
Well, thank you so much. And I believe our chat is live. So if you can chat, let us know where you're calling in from. We want to get a sense of who's on the line. We got folks from east to west. We do know that. And there's a special guest tonight. Not only is he an expert, but he's also the birthday boy tonight. Dr. Mac Roach is here with us all the way from California. And we want to say happy, you're not going to believe it, 70th birthday to Dr. Mac Roach. We want to give you a quick happy birthday shout out and say thank you so much. Now, listen, he's got to leave us in a few minutes, but he did not want to miss out on the opportunity to be able to engage with us and give us some of this insight. So I'm so grateful to hear that he was able to join us on his special day. So without further ado, I want to make sure that we jump right into the chat. I see now the chat is disabled, so I did not know that, but I see you in the chat anyway on the Q&A. If you have questions, get ready to start putting it in the Q&A function. Get ready to put it in the Q&A function. I'm going to turn it over to the Professor of Radiation, Oncology, and Urology, Dr. Mac Roach from the University of California, San Francisco. Dr. Mac, happy birthday, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Actually, I was just thinking about it while I was sitting here. I have been treating patients for prostate cancer for half of my life. And I turned 70 today. I've been treating men with prostate cancer for half of my life, and I've been interested in particular in prostate cancer in Black men, and I've published a lot of papers on it, and I've been dealing with the issues of race and prostate cancer. But I'm going to start off with one of the key questions that people are going to be interested in, which is about the issue of screening. So this is what I call the common sense approach. Here's the problem. If you screen 100 men, that is, if you do the blood test on 100 men, and the blood test, this is, when we do the blood test, we're looking for something called PSA, which stands for prostate specific antigen, and the normal is generally less than 4. So if you screen 100 men, about 95 of them are going to be normal. And and then those men that have normal PSAs, you can reassure them, tell them it doesn't mean they won't ever get prostate cancer, but we don't have any evidence that they have it right now, okay? 5 will have abnormal. And in those 5, we should discuss the risk and the benefits of a biopsy. We shouldn't discuss the risk and benefits of treatment yet. The guidelines for the American Cancer Society and some organizations say you should discuss the risk and benefits of treatment. But you cannot really discuss the risk and benefits of treatment unless you know whether the person has prostate cancer and whether they have an aggressive form or a non-aggressive form. So at this point, the conversation should be, if you get a biopsy, you can have bleeding a little bit, you could have infection, there can be a little bit of pain, but that's pretty much it. So the risk and benefits of a biopsy. So the patient gets the biopsy. And of these men that get biopsies, a significant number of them, the biopsies will be negative. They won't show cancer. So again, you reassure them and you follow them. In some cases, you might need to do another biopsy if it's suspicious, or do an MRI and that kind of thing. But so some of the men will have a positive biopsy. And in those men with a positive biopsies, now that positive biopsy means you have found cancer. Now you need to discuss the risk and benefits of treatment. But here's another problem. American Cancer Society and other organizations imply that the primary care doctor needs to be involved in this conversation. And that's not really the case. They don't treat prostate cancer. So the risk and benefits of treatment should be discussed with a urologist and a radiation oncologist. I'm a radiation oncologist. I have an appointment in the Department of Urology as well. So when the biopsy is performed, you're going to get patients who have low risk prostate cancer. And those patients, many of them you can do active surveillance. So this AS means active surveillance. They don't need treatment. You can follow, especially if the man's over 70. Intermediate risk patients need to get treated, and the treatment is not that aggressive in terms of drugs, radiation, surgery, that sort of thing, but pretty effective. And high-risk patients definitely need to be treated. These are the patients that are at greatest risk of dying of prostate cancer. So I'm going to come back to this slide near the end of my presentation, but basically, you've heard it from me. African-American men should be screened. If nobody else gets screened, we need to be getting screened, because our incidence of prostate cancer is higher and our mortality is higher. So I'm going to talk about race and prostate cancer. What is the prostate? I'm going to talk about some of the controversies and how racism sometimes plays a role in what happens to Black men, like everything else. So what is race? There was a review article published some years ago. It said that on average, 0.2, there's a 0.2% difference in the genetic makeup between any two randomly chosen people on Earth. So even though a person might be pale and blonde, and you might be dark and kinky hair, the fact is the genetic information in your body is mostly about your lungs and your blood and your heart. It's not about your pigment or your skin. So most of the genetic information has nothing to do with your phenotypic or your physical appearance. And only 6% represents differences between races. That's 6% of 0.2%. So race accounts for a minuscule 0.012% difference. But the same people that use race to try to justify why we have unemployment at a high rate, why more Black men are in jail, they try to also blame prostate cancer on our genetic makeup, and I'll talk about that. Now, this is a diagram that shows where the prostate is located. This dotted line here shows the prostate and the seminal vesicle. This is a lateral slice. In the front of the body, you can see the penis here, the testicles here. This is the bladder here, the rectum's back here. When a man has a radical prostatectomy, basically the surgeon excises the material that the dotted line corresponds to. And consequently, they have to reconnect the bladder to the urethra, this urethra that goes through the prostate. And this area is called the urogenital diaphragm. So things are sewn back together there, and that allows continence to happen. Now, if this procedure is not done perfectly, the man can have some leakage. And in addition to that, this purple structure here is the penis. And if the surgery is not done perfectly in terms of protecting the nerves, then the nerves to the penis and the blood supply to the penis can be compromised, and the man can have problems with sexual function. When you use radiation, we leave the prostate there. In some cases, for example, we use a term called brachytherapy. Sometimes people call seeds. We simply use ultrasound to stick radioactive seeds in the prostate and leave it there. And consequently, the issues of incontinence and the issues of erectile dysfunction are less of an issue when you have radiation instead of surgery. Now, these are some statistics that show this is the adjusted rate per 100,000, showing African-American men, Black men up here, and white men down here. So we have a significantly higher mortality rate from prostate cancer. Now, I've thrown in some slides to kind of break the monotony here. Famous Black men whose last name starts with a B who got prostate cancer. Well, we got Dusty Baker, used to be a manager of Giants. Now he just won the World Series. Last year, you had Marion Barry, who was the mayor. You had Harry Belafonte had prostate cancer, and James Brown had prostate cancer. It's so common among African-American men. Many African-American men got prostate cancer. Now, one of the question is, how did this race issue come to be? If we go back to the 19th century, back when they did the Tuskegee experiments, one of the things that happened at the time of slavery, the slaveholders thought that Black people were different, that there were different diseases in Black people. So they had a disease they call cachexia african, which meant dirt eating. Slaveholders begged Southern doctors to write medical manuals on the treatment of Blacks. Physicians simply continued to assert that Black people were medically inferior without providing a plausible medical explanation. So we had a very high infant mortality rate. And they blamed that infant mortality rate not on slavery, not on poor care, not on poor diet, not on poor conditions. They said Black people were genetically inferior. And so we have always had disparities. The first Black man to be licensed to practice medicine was James Durham, 1762. So this is before slavery was ended. He purchased his freedom 21 years later. The Supreme Court allowed separate facilities in public places and so forth. And of course, if you don't have very many Black doctors, you're not going to get very many doctors who really care about their patients. So separate of equal was ruled constitutional. And they did these Tuskegee experiments in 1932, experimenting on Black people. I won't talk about that much, but the US Congress passed the Civil Rights Act in 1964. And then the SEER program, which stands for Surveillance, Epidemiology, and End Results, was created with the National Cancer Act in 1971. And this is when people started systematically collecting data on the statistics about race and cancer. And I'm going to jump forward. This is from an article published in 1998 in one of the prominent cancer journals called the Journal of the National Cancer Institute. This is called Race, Prostate Cancer Survival and Membership in a Large HMO. So this is about Kaiser patients. So they did a study and they looked at the crude death rate between Kaiser patients, white versus Black. You can see it's higher for Black Kaiser patients who had local disease, who had regional disease, and who had metastatic disease. Interestingly enough, they also had data on non-Kaiser patients. And the non-Kaiser patients were a little different than the Kaiser patients. I'm going to come back to that. And so they wrote this paper, and they concluded that the findings are most consistent with the hypothesis of increased tumor virulence in Blacks. So Kaiser doctors, Kaiser statisticians postulated that prostate cancer was inherently more aggressive in Black men. Now, the problem was that didn't explain this. If there's a difference in outcome equals biologic difference, then what about the absence of difference of outcome? So the point here is that if you looked at Kaiser and non-Kaiser people, you see non-Kaiser whites had a similar survival than Kaiser blacks. Does that mean that white people who are non-Kaiser are genetically similar to black people who have Kaiser insurance? It makes no sense. This is crazy. They didn't control for treatment. They didn't control accurately for stage. They just did local, regional, and distant. So quality of care was not there. And they assumed that because they had the equal type of insurance, that their care must be equal. So they were assuming that because they were Kaiser patients, that everybody got the same treatment. The problem is that we know that there are other factors that come into play. Now, this slide is a little bit out of order. This is a slide that looks at prostate cancer incidence per 100,000 and looks at whites, Chinese men born in China, living in the US, born in the US, living in the US, Chinese men who were born in China and moved to the US, and Chinese men who were born in China, living in China. And what you can see is that when Chinese people take on the Western lifestyle, their incidence of prostate cancer goes up. So this was done before routine screening. And this suggests that there are social, cultural things that will affect the incidence of prostate cancer. Okay. Last name starting with C, who died of prostate cancer. Stokely Carmichael, this is a very interesting coincidence. Stokely Carmichael and Eldridge Cleaver both died of prostate cancer in 1998. In fact, I had a conversation with Stokely Carmichael before he died. Albert Einstein once said, if you had 1 hour to save the world, he was asked, if you have 1 hour to save the world, how would you spend that hour? He replied he would spend 55 minutes defining the problem and then 5 minutes solving the problem. They really haven't done this with respect to African-American men and prostate cancer. We haven't spent enough time defining the problem using real data. And part of the issue is that we're not involved. So this is a study looking at genetic testing for inherited prostate cancer risk. So this consensus conference was an international consensus conference for people from all over the world. It was in Philadelphia in 2017. Now, you know there's a lot of Black people in Philadelphia. And they conclude, to our knowledge, this is the first comprehensive multidisciplinary consensus statement to address a genetic evaluation of prostate cancer. Okay, but the researchers came from the US, Canada, England, and Netherlands. They had 60 participants and one person was African-American. They had 2 sentences in the paper mentioning African-Americans, no data or speculation as to the genetic reasons that might explain the increased risk for prostate cancer in African-American men. So this tells us, once again, you cannot count on our white brothers and sisters to adequately address the prostate cancer problems that African-American men deal with. Now, this is from a study that I published back in 2007. This is a study looking at one of the genes that were postulated to possibly be associated with an increased death from cancer. It was what we call a polymorphism. It was CYP3A4 polymorphism. And I did this study and we looked at it. It turned out that African-American men in the dotted line did at least as well, if not better, than whites, despite differences in this CYP3A4 polymorphism. So when you see a study in which the researchers say, oh, we found this gene, it's more common in Black men, that doesn't mean that that gene is going to explain why prostate cancer is more common in Black men or why the mortality rate is higher in Black men. This is another one of those things. This is a so-called CAG repeats. This was all the rage. They showed that if you looked at, these are CAG repeats are part of the genetic makeup, and they showed that there were differences between Black and white people in terms of the number had long repeats and short repeats. Well, it turns out that didn't have nothing to do with the disease, but people got paid. People got funded to do research looking at these CAG repeats, and it didn't do nothing for Black people, but it did a lot of stuff for researchers who wanted to get paid. This is a picture of my deceased uncle. This is Hank Aaron. In fact, the dinner that I'm having for my 70th birthday party that's being paid for by my aunt, who happens to be his widow. And they used to say that Black people had inherently more aggressive prostate cancer. That was the dogma. But they also said we were too dumb to play basketball. They said we were too dumb to be quarterback in the NFL. We had 2 Black quarterbacks in the Super Bowl. We were too dumb to play golf. We were too dumb to be president. How they like us now, and too dumb to play baseball. Hank still owns the record for most runs batted in the history of Major League Baseball. So we've proved them wrong repeatedly. We've proved them wrong again when it comes to prostate cancer being inherently more aggressive in Black men. And I'm coming back to the issue of insurance. So Kaiser postulated, well, if they all got Kaiser, they must be getting the same care. There are numerous studies that show that if you look at the use of revascularization procedures in men with coronary artery disease, it's higher in whites than Blacks, even though they both have the same health care. Same thing in the VA hospital, use of coronary bypass surgery, same thing in other areas. So it doesn't matter whether we have the same kind of insurance, we don't get the same quality of care. Here's another looking at income. So they got high income, it doesn't matter. If you look at coronary artery bypass surgery, whites were more likely, regardless of income, in Medicare beneficiaries to get the surgery. So it's not economic, it's about quality of care. This is a study that looked at disparities in the utilization. So some places where they do surgery, they do high volume surgery, and high volume surgery centers get better results. The people that were less likely to get this high volume care at high volume places are Black people. So there are a whole host of genetic studies. This is, I'm not going to dwell on this just to make the point. There are studies that have been done more recently that look at how stress and adverse social consequences in your life can adversely affect people's genetics, their genetic outcome. This has been done in children. These are studies, I'm not going to, how discrimination gets under the skin. Biologic determinants can cause dysregulation of the brain-gut microbiome system and have psychological symptoms. So it turns out the largest immune part of your body is your gut. And if you get stressed, it can affect not only your diet, your lifestyle, but your gut, and affect your immune system, your ability to fight, because your immune system is partly supposed to suppress the cancer development in your body. And we know that Black people are stressed. If you looked at Blacks represent 40% of those incarcerated, but somewhere between 6.5 and 13% of the population. So disproportionate numbers. And again, I'm not going to dwell on this, or the criminal justice system, how Black people end up in there. That's stressful, because even though slavery was banned, they made loitering vagrancy laws that made it a crime for a person to not be employed after they ended slavery. They created a criminal justice system that was selectively to the disadvantage of Black people in America. And we know that there are effects in the micro environment. There are studies that show that these effects can affect the blood supply and tumor cells, and affect their response. So Shayna had asked me, why do I have this stuff in here about ovarian cancer? There's studies that show in humans that you can monitor, you can measure stress. They've done it with rats. So if you take these mice and you see these copper locks, these mice can move up and down in the cage. These mice are trapped because they move the lockdown so they can't move. And then when you create that environment, you can see that norepinephrine, this is a fight or flight metric for stress, that the ones that are restricted, the ones that are inhibited from being able to be free, they have biologic consequences that measure stress. And here's the ovarian cancer example. They had 10 women that had ovarian cancer, 5 with high social support and low depression, and 5 with low social support and high depression. And they looked at the genetics of what happened in their tumors, and you can see that there were differences in the biology of their tumors from that. And when we come back to prostate cancer, these are data from the SEER data. And if you just take the year 1988, Black men and white men, and you looked at what happened to Black men diagnosed in prostate cancer in 1988, well, over 50% of them got no treatment compared to most of the white men got treatment. So when they talk about survival, they need to talk about who was getting aggressive treatment, who got surgery, you know, who didn't get any treatment at all. This is a table that I put together that's in a manuscript that's going to be published shortly. This is a summary of every major randomized trial. So the thing is, when you do a randomized trial, you actually have the same care. These people signed a consent and they were randomly assigned to get one treatment or another treatment. So there's 12 studies here. When they did that, it turns out that only one of the studies did African-American men do worse. In 8 of the studies, African-American men did the same. And these in yellow, which are more recent and larger studies, African-American men actually did better than white men, better outcomes. So part of the take-home message is the notion that prostate cancer is inherently more aggressive in Black men is a myth. Now, we have another paper that is being completed that incorporates artificial intelligence. We digitized data on more than 5,000 patients and did a very sophisticated analysis of this. And we showed that if you look at African-American men, you got over 5,000 treated on systematic randomized trials, and you looked at the risk of metastatic disease, the non-African-Americans, or mostly white men, actually did worse than African-American men in this study. So race is not an independent prognostic factor. More work needs to be done to understand better why prostate cancer is more common in Black men. And you need to be screened. These are men, other famous men, Farrakhan, Langston Hughes, famous poet, Quincy Jones, all of them had prostate cancer. Then we had Nelson Mandela, Colin Powell, Sidney Poitier, all had prostate cancer. Tiger Woods' father died of prostate cancer, and Andrew Young was treated for prostate cancer. Well, he's doing fine. So I'm not arguing against informed consent, but what I am arguing, the Black men, if anybody gets screened, Black men should get screened. And this is the slide I showed you initially. You should be screened. And if your blood test is abnormal, you should get a biopsy. And if the biopsy shows cancer, then you need to discuss the risk and benefits of based on the type of cancer that you have. And so I'm going to close with this last slide. Of all the forms of inequality, injustice in healthcare is the most shocking and inhumane. And with that, I'm going to stop my talk. And I'm going to give some people some time I'm going to go to my car and head off to my birthday dinner. And from my car, I will take questions.
That sounds great. Get on the road and we're going to come right back to you.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Dr. Roach. And I see the chat. We've got folks calling in from all over the country to hear stories about what's happening from California to New York to South Carolina, even Oklahoma, Chicago. We see you all over the country. Our Divine Nine family and 100 family and NCNW family are here. So I'm going to ask the team to spotlight Charles Latham and Luther Arline, our two survivors. It's so exciting to be able to have this conversation with you all. I'm going to start, Brother Charles. I want you to go ahead and highlight, give us a little bit about your story, how you knew that you needed to get checked for prostate cancer, and what advice would you give to those that are listening?
Reverend, are you talking to this Charles?
Yes. Brother Latham, excuse me. Yes, yes. We got two Charles, Brother Griggs and Brother Latham. Yes, yes.
Well, I tell you about myself. Back in 2003, I was living in San Diego, California, working for the government, preparing for retirement. I had Kaiser, by the way, Kaiser Permanente, by the way, out there. So I decided to go in and have a routine physical just to get myself checked out. But again, I'm planning on retiring, moving back to Mississippi, and I wanted to deal with doctors and hospitals that I was familiar with in California. I had no idea what the healthcare system was down here in Mississippi. So I went in for a routine PSA check, just like the doctor said. And the numbers came back high. And so my doctor recommended that I have a biopsy. And I followed the process just like Dr. Roach had laid out. You know, I went right through that process. And every man who's had prostate issues knows exactly how many times that needle hit him during that biopsy. They took 11 samples from my biopsy. Of those 11 samples, only one of those samples had cancer in it. What detected cancer, and only 1% of that one sample, you know. So then I had to make some decisions. Remember, this is 2003. This is 20 years ago. By the way, on September the 5th makes 20 years that I've been surviving cancer, and so I'm very happy about that. Thank you. And so I went on and had the biopsy, as I said, and I had some decisions to make. It was way back then. I had the radical prostatectomy that the doctor described. I had the nerve sparing procedure, which allowed me to, you know, still have the nerves to stimulate me, if you will. So that is how it happened to me. And I went right on through it. And I'm here to tell you that had I not gone through that procedure, and I didn't have any symptoms, by the way, because that's one of the questions people ask.
That was one of the questions we had. No symptoms.
I had zero symptoms, you know, but I went on and made the decision to have the cancer removed from my body. Now, back during that time, the robotics procedure was relatively new, but I wanted to stick with a tried and true procedure, which was the radical prostatectomy. Remember, I was scared. And so I went on through it, and I'm here to tell you that had I not done that, I would have been dead 19 years ago. I'm sure of that. That was my experience, and I've had a great life since then. I thank God for it.
And we thank God for you. And let me just say this, we don't like to have these conversations. And many times it feels uncomfortable for folks, but this is life-changing discussions, right? We're talking about sexual health. We're talking about brothers being able to have very difficult conversations, men that have families, have children, have wives, have partners, and are concerned about the experience. There's a special guest. You see this last name, Arline. I know this guy pretty well. He happens to be my father. My dad is a prostate cancer survivor, and my brother. My brother was diagnosed in his 40s. And my father was diagnosed in his late 50s, early 60s. And so, Dad, I want you to, this is Luther Arline, give a little bit about your story. I remember being there through this process with you, and so glad that you both were able to share tonight.
Yes, thank you, Siobhan, for having me on. I also had the prostate problems early on. What I noticed in 1986, my doctor told me, Mr. Arline, your prostate is enlarged. We need to keep a watch of that prostate. And so from that point on, my doctor began to give me the PSA test whenever it was time to go. And I did that for several years. And he said, continue to watch it, continue to watch it, continue to watch it. just like Mr. Latham says, I finally, when it got to a certain point, they said, okay, I need to send you to a urologist because your numbers are getting a little bit high. Went to the urologist, and I got the biopsy. I had 12 biopsies also. One of my lobes had cancer in it. And so they also gave me talked about what do you like to do? There's different process you can go through. There's the pellets or the seeds, they say, or the other treatment, or you can get the radical surgery. At that time, talking with my family, I believe I was 60 at the time. I think I was 60 or 61, I believe it was. And we discussed it, everything. And so I just decided that, okay, I think I better have mine removed also. I had the robotic surgery though. It was relatively new. Just like you said, Mr. Latham, it was relatively new, but my primary doctor had a friend of his who was a urologist, and he was considered one of the experts in it. And he told me, if anybody, God couldn't do it any better than him. That's what they told us. Yeah. So anyway, that's what I decided to do. And so I had the surgery, and that was in, that would have been 2010. Mm-hmm. Yeah, 2010. So thank God at that time, I'm now that many years free of cancer. I just had my test the yearly test last month, August, and mm-hmm. It was the same thing. My PSA was fine. It did no signs of cancer. So just like you, Mr. Latham, I had that same experience, and I'm really glad that I did. I do want to say, I'm not sure. I was a little bit older. I was 61 or 62 at the time, I believe, 61. And I was concerned about nerves testing too, or nerves being damaged or something like that. That was my biggest concern. I thank God I had a wife and family that their concern was me being here rather than that other type of thing. So that's why I decided to have the surgery. That's why I decided to do that. And thank God I did. So cancer-free for that many years since.
I just wanted to let you know that I'm back on in case anybody has any questions for me.
We do, and you came right on time after our testimonies, Dr. Roach. First of all, Mr. Latham and Dad, thank you for sharing. I want you all to stay on with Dr. Roach. Dr. Roach, there's a number of questions about when. When are you supposed to get screened? And should you get colon screening and prostate screening? There's about 3 or 4 questions that have asked that specific question. So when should someone get their test? What age?
So usually the age that's recommended is 50. Unless you have a risk factor, and being African-American is a risk factor. So that would bring you down to 45. And then if you have a family history, like if your father, your brother, or especially if you have multiple brothers. I've treated multiple brothers, especially twins. They have a much higher risk of prostate cancer. So, but those guidelines, I started screening at 35, okay, myself. And so the bottom line is that you just get a baseline blood test. When they draw all that other stuff, check your cholesterol and your, other stuff, make sure you don't have diabetes and all that stuff. You just have them throw a PSA in there. But so for most African-American men, I think 45 to 50 is a reasonable number. But if you got a family history that's strong, the stronger it is, the sooner I would do it. And then the other point is that I encourage people to know their numbers. What happens is sometimes I ask if people had the PSA and I say, so what was your PSA? And then he said, the doctor said it was fine. And I'm like, fine for who?
Right.
I want to know what the number is, because then you can say, well, 2 years ago it was 1 and now it's 3. Even though the normal is up to 4, if you're a young man, if you're 45 or 50 and your PSA is 3.5, you don't need to wait for that thing to go to 4. You might want to say, well, 2 years ago, my PSA was 0.5 and now it's 3.5. Maybe I need to have that thing investigated. So I think you ought to know your number. Don't just, I'm going to tell you, I'm uncomfortable with people saying, oh, your test was fine. I've seen legal cases where people have been sued because I'm talking about doctors have been sued where the patient says, well, the doctor told me I was fine. Well, you know, that's not good enough. So I encourage people to be more knowledgeable about their care.
And Dr. Rocha, I'm gonna stay with you on this next question that keeps coming up, which is the difference between the surgery and then the pellets. So there's the robotic surgery, there's the pellets, there's radiation. Can you help clarify so folks can understand?
Okay, so first of all, the best way to determine what the best treatment is a randomized trial. A randomized trial means they get people to sign a consent and they get randomly assigned to treatment A or treatment B, and then they follow them for 10 years and they check it out and see what happens. It turns out that there was a study called the Prostate study, which was a randomized trial. They randomized men between surgery and radiation. And it turned out that at 10 years, the risk of recurrence was the same in surgery patients and radiation patients. These weren't pellets, these were external beam radiation. The pellets are a different type of radiation where you implant it, and that's technically more challenging, but it's also very effective. But this was external beam radiation. The study was carried out in the UK. Now, the difference was, though, that the patients that got the surgery had more problems with incontinence and more problems with erectile dysfunction. So, so this is the best data that we have, which is data that head-to-head comparison of surgery versus radiation. So the notion that radical prostatectomy is better than radiation is a belief that many urologists have been taught and many urologists believe, but just because they believe it doesn't make it so.
Yeah.
So in terms of
that's
pellets,
very helpful.
in terms of pellets, pellets have become less popular.
Okay.
They have become less popular in part because they're technically more difficult to do. I've done more than 1,500. The technical term is brachytherapy. I've done more than 1,500 of those, and the pellets or the brachytherapy comes in two flavors. One are low dose rate, where you put them in permanently. So low dose rate and permanent are interchangeable terms. Or you can go high dose rate, which is a temporary implant, also sometimes called HDR or high dose rate implants. And there are a lot of people, the high dose rate temporary implants have become more popular because the permanent ones are technically more difficult to do, and also the seeds can migrate. When you get the seeds in people's veins, I had a patient one time, he called me up, he had a Geiger counter, and when he went home, he Geiger counted his chest and found there was a seed in his heart. And he called me up, he said, Dr. Roach, if I had known I was gonna get a seed in my heart, I would have chosen surgery. So, but the temporary, if you do a lot of them, it's not a common thing. Usually the vast majority, there have been rare occasions where the migrated seeds have caused problems for people, but there are alternative forms of external beam radiation that we use. One that I use more now is called stereotactic body radiotherapy. So it's a form of external beam radiation. So like in that randomized trial called the Prostate study, where they gave external beam radiation over like 7 weeks, I used to treat people with 40 treatments. And now many of those people I treat with 4 treatments.
Wow.
They get treated like Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and it's done. So for selected patients with favorable intermediate risk disease, if they have low risk disease, I usually recommend active surveillance. If they have favorable intermediate risk disease, I usually recommend stereotactic body radiotherapy, which is usually done using 4 or 5 radiation sessions.
That's amazing. One more question before you, Doc, before you head out, and that's this question around PSA numbers. what are normal PSA numbers? Because we want to get a sense of what that is.
Well, the normal is typically less than 4. But if you have a patient that has a PSA between 4 and 10, and you biopsy them, only about 25% of them actually have cancer. So the fact that that's a threshold that we use to do the biopsy doesn't mean that if you have an elevated PSA, you have cancer. But the typical, about 25% of people with PSAs between 4 and 10 will actually have cancer. Now, people like to badmouth PSA. They say, oh, the PSA can be this. We use PSA also to determine whether or not our treatment was successful or not. So if you have a radical prostatectomy, if your prostate is removed, your PSA should be undetectable. That is, using an ultra-sensitive assay, your PSA should come out as less than 0.02 and should stay down there. And if it starts going up, then you probably need to think about getting radiation or at least have an evaluation for a possible recurrence. With radiation, because the prostate is still there, the definition is different. So, but typically in patients that get effective, aggressive radiation, the PSA after treatment is around 0.5, 0.4, 0.2, 0.1. So it becomes very low and should stay at that low level. So PSA is actually very important, not only to determine who you should biopsy, but also in terms of monitoring and determine the success of the treatment the patients had.
Now we're hearing about questions about trends in treatment. Can you talk about new trends? There's questions about the proton treatment or any new trends in treatment.
Well, I think the stereotactic body radiotherapy, where you treat people with 4 or 5 treatments, is probably the biggest change in radiation. Protons have been used for many years, and there's no evidence that proton therapy is better than conventional X-ray treatment. And I've done research on that area. I've published on that area. I actually had a grant studying the particle therapy. I've been working in particle therapy space for many years. Marketing is the main thing that the doctors at first, like at Loma Linda, they marketed very aggressively protons, but there's no evidence that protons are better.
This is great information. We're going to turn this over to Brother Griggs. Brother Griggs, I'm going to make sure I jump in with you with the 100 because we are partnering with you all. NCNW is partnering with the Coalition of 100 Black Men of America. And specifically, what are some of the action steps the 100 is taking? What are some of your action steps you're taking to reduce prostate cancer disparities? And talk to us about the messaging that you're doing for prostate cancer screening.
I just want to say bye to everybody, and thanks for allowing me to be involved.
Thanks for joining us. Happy birthday.
Okay.
All right, bye-bye.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Roach. And Dr. Roach gave us a lot of valuable information in a very short period of time.
He sure did.
Related to prostate cancer awareness and diagnosis and treatment. What we've been trying to do is to take all of that information and bottle it into an aggressive network campaign throughout our chapter networks and educate our members, their families about prostate cancer, providing basic information about awareness, encouraging provider relationships, and encouraging men to get those annual physicals that we heard Dr. Roach mention. I encourage people to get those annual physicals, and not only get the physical, but have a relationship with your primary care provider and your urologist. My primary care provider is a good friend of mine. We've been friends for years. But when I turned 55, he turned me over to a urologist when it was time to do my prostate exam. And my urologist now is a good friend of mine. So I feel like I can call upon them and ask them those tough questions that I need to have answered, just around PSAs, around screening. Those are the types of things that we're encouraging men to do. And also, you heard Dr. Roach talk a lot about these research and clinical trials that he's been participating in. He's authored. we're encouraging men to actually actively participate in those research and clinical trials. He talked a little bit about about proton therapy. Right now, we are actively participating in a proton radiation therapy clinical trial by encouraging Black men to participate in that trial, making sure that they have enough numbers of Black men in the trial to make the information relevant, to try to get as much information about how these diagnoses and treatments are going to work for Black men. We heard a lot about prostate cancer screening. Well, you know, back in 2012, the United States Preventive Services Task Force recommended that we remove prostate cancer screening for Black men at the age of 40. They recommended that Black men, all men, didn't need to be screened until they turned 60 years old. Now we know better.
Right.
So the 100 went to work. We developed our own screening guidelines.
There you
and
go.
right now, our guidelines are that we encourage men to have conversations with their providers starting at the age of 35. And then based on those conversations, somewhere in around the age of 40, 45 years old, start to getting that PSA test done, along with the DRE, which is a digital rectal exam. So, those urologists and primary can, they may sometimes feel abnormalities in the prostate right there. It's something that's uncomfortable. It's an uncomfortable conversation for a lot of men to have. We've had those barbershop conversations where men have said, nobody's sticking their finger in my behind. Right. They're not going to do that to me. I've been working in research, and I've had men tell me in focus groups, ain't nobody sticking their finger in my behind because that's going to make me gay. Right. And so we know we've been there. So, and more important, I think one of the more important things we've been really trying to encourage shared decision-making upon, between our family members.
Yes.
As you can tell, this is a lot of information to take in, and men back away. They tend to back away from these decisions. This keeps guys out of the doctor's office because they don't want to hear what the doctor has to say. It's not going to happen to me. I'm so macho that whatever the doctor says or whatever is going on in my body, I can handle it. So we've been asking the wives, the daughters, the sons to participate and ask questions and be a part of the shared decision-making when it comes to supporting the man and their family. Maybe your uncle, maybe your father, maybe your grandfather. It may be all those things, but the shared decision-making makes it easier for a man to land and take in all of the information at one time. And again, one of the things that we've really been trying to get active in is advocacy around policy.
Yes.
While we were in DC, we met with Congressman, got his name now. We're actually supporting the HIMSS Act, the PSA HIMSS Act, where we're asking Congress to remove barriers behind screening and making that free for men who can't afford it, who may not have access to care. And so we're asking people to support that. And that is the type of advocacy we're looking for, that through the 100, to make sure that all men have access to screening, and we go from there. So we think we can make a difference in this. I'm sorry, Congressman Troy Carter.
Out of New Orleans.
That's right, out of New Orleans.
Absolutely.
He's co-sponsoring that bill along with several others, and he's been an active supporter of prostate cancer screening.
So this is actually the information that we want to hear. Please support that act. Call your legislators. This is the work that we're doing in partnership with the 100 Black Men of America and NCNW. Listen, in the chat, let us know where you are from the 100, what chapters you're from. If you're a member of the Divine Nine, let us know. We want to acknowledge our chair, Dr. Keith. Lois Keith, I see you from Atlanta, Georgia, our chair of the board. I want to come back to our two survivors to give us some closing remarks. And I hope that you don't mind, if someone was struggling right now with a decision they need to make, right? What advice would you give? I'll start with you, Brother Latham. What advice would you give, and other closing remarks to encourage our listeners tonight? Because we really want to make sure that they hear from folks who have been there, who have experienced it, but also who have been blessed to survive it. So, Brother Latham, close us out with your remarks, your advice and your remarks before we go.
Very good, Reverend, I appreciate that. The one thing that I would say to any man or anybody who's listening to this right now Your family needs you. Your family needs you. Your wife, your children, your grandchildren, your brother, they need you. There were 6 boys in my family and 1 girl. 4 of us have had prostate cancer. When 4, and see, one of the things is that we as Black men, this is something that we don't talk about. And see, when I was diagnosed with prostate cancer, I started asking my father. He didn't have the education to articulate what his problems were and what he had experienced. I later learned that both of my grandfathers had prostate issues. So I have one son who will at 45 start getting himself checked out. And this is what happened to me. I must say, you talk about some of the things we're doing. As a result of me having prostate cancer, coming back to Mississippi and talking to men, frank talk, honest talk with men about prostate cancer, 25 of them, 25 have said that their doctors told them that the advice I gave them to talk helped save their lives. And I also have to talk about the one, just briefly, because there was one classmate of mine who did not listen. And he told me, and he ended up dying of prostate cancer, but he told me to tell his story. And I tell everybody his story when I talk about the 25 that listened and the one that didn't listen. As a result of my discussing prostate cancer in the community, I've ended up on the advisory boards of the University of Alabama Community Outreach and Engagement Advisory Board. The Mike Slive Foundation saw the work that I was doing with them, and now I'm a member of their advisory board. We over here, and they funded, Mike Slive funded a project through UAB called the Hey Fellas program, of which I'm an ambassador over here in Grenada, Mississippi, where we have frank, honest discussion with men about prostate cancer. On September the 6th, we had the city of Grenada declare September the 6th as Prostate Cancer Awareness Day, and we had the first annual I'm with Mike Prostate Cancer Awareness Walk here in Grenada. So these are some of the things that I think is we as African Americans, particularly survivors of this dreaded disease, we need to be out there talking to people, telling people about it. And I'm gonna say one other thing to the men who are listening to this. The primary concern I hear from most men is that, well, I'm not gonna be able to have sex. My sex life gonna be all messed up. I simply say to them, and I say to every man that listening, you can't have sex no way if you did. So you need to be alive to have a chance in life. You need to be alive for the people who love you. So if you don't hear another word I say, men, understand that you are important to your family and go get yourself checked. And don't worry about a man sticking his finger doing the DRE to you.
That's right.
Don't worry about that, because that doesn't take your manhood away. It doesn't challenge you in any way, so get over that.
That's right.
Think about living. If saving my life means for anyone run their finger, give me the finger wave, we can finger wave all day, because I want to live. And I thank God, I knew I would have been dead 19 years ago.
That's right.
So that don't change the man I am.
No, it
it ain't
does not.
Change the man you are. You know who you are. So think about living for your family and think about living for the people who love you.
Brother Latham out here dropping this knowledge. This finger wave done messed up my head, though. I'm telling you, you gave us the mic drop. Come on, Daddy, close us out. And I want to do a few more announcements before you all go.
I don't need to say too much at all. That's Mr. Latham. He done hit everything. What I really want to say, basically, I want to concur with what you're saying, Mr. Latham, especially about those Black men who don't want to go get screened because they don't want, nobody's going to put their finger up my, you know what. And I tell young people today that you need to do that, but that now you could even get the PSA, so you don't even have to get that done. But your family is more important. For you to be there for your family and your friends is more and more important. Just like you said, if you don't, you're gonna be dead. I had a couple, my couple personal friends that passed. My best friend passed 52 years old. And he told me, my nickname is Tommy. He said, Tommy, man, make sure you check your prostate. I said, I checked my prostate, Sonny, I've been doing it. And he said, well, I never checked mine. And he died at 52. I'm one of my best friends. So what I'm saying, it is vital that we go get screened early. Early detection is one of the biggest things we can do. If we find out early, then we will know what to do. There's some new things that the doctor has said to us. I really wasn't aware of some of those things, so I'm glad he said those things, because it's a different treatments today than it was back when I had my surgery. But it's very important, men, Black men, please go get screened, go get checked. Don't be afraid, because it's important. It's rather your family needs you here rather than for you to be gone, but because several men have died. And I will say this one last thing. One of my friends said to me, well, Tommy, listen, I heard that you had your surgery. He said, I'm glad you did that. He said, because I didn't want to do it. And so I messed around and waited too late. And of course, about less than a year later, he was dead. So I'm glad that I did it. And he told me he's glad that I went and had the surgery because he did something else. And so I'm just encouraging all men, please get yourself tested and checked out. Early detection, that's the best thing that can happen for you, and then find out what's the best thing to do. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thanks, Daddy. He's still my daddy. I thank God he did it. I'm a daddy's girl, and I am so excited to have you here. Brother Latham, thank you. Brother Griggs, we appreciate you all. Listen, for those that are on the line, please, there's a survey about to come into this chat. Take this survey. Let us know if these are kind of events that you want us to host. NCNW is partnering with great organizations like the 100 Black Men of America. This partnership is not going to stop. We're going to come back. We're working on some dates in November to do a part 2. Brother Roach brought some serious information, Dr.
Yes,
and from the perspective of Black communities. That is our framework. People of African descent is our context. This has been an amazing opportunity. Please share this on Facebook. Start sharing it with your folks. We see all the folks that join us tonight. There's a survey that's coming out as soon as we're done. Please take that survey. We need to know if this was helpful to you. We need to know, should we do more of these? And I do want to let you know, tomorrow night, I'll be on Zoom again with the incomparable Shirley Ralph. We're going to be on the line tomorrow night with Shirley Ralph. Join us for Diva 2.0, a conversation with sisters. Share that with your networks. I see you all in the chat. Sending hugs to our presenters. This is great information that we've had tonight. Team, did I miss anything else before we bid everybody good night? I think we're good. Thanks again to Walmart. We want to thank the 100, the D9, our sections, our affiliates. Y'all showed up tonight from all over the country. More to come. God bless you all. Have a wonderful evening. God bless the 100 Black Men of America. And I think Dr. Bethune and Dr. Hype be very proud of our partnership tonight. Our founders are definitely smiling. So God bless you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much.